My name is Brenda Stratford, and at 67, I was the master of a life curated with the precision of a museum piece. For 45 years, my husband, Robert, and I had built an empire, not just of business, but of shared moments, inside jokes, and a love I believed to be as solid and unyielding as the granite countertops in our kitchen. He was the brilliant CEO of Stratford Industries, a company he'd inherited and grown into a titan, and I was his partner, his confidant, his social anchor. Our two children were grown and successful, and we were standing on the precipice of a golden retirement, a vista of Tuscan sunsets and leisurely yachting trips stretching before us. Our world was perfect, polished to a high sheen, with no visible cracks. Then, on a Tuesday in May, a day as ordinary as any other, a massive coronary artery blockage ripped through Robert's heart and tore our perfect world to pieces. The call came from his assistant, her voice a frantic, fractured thing. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The silence in the sterile, white room was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The weeks that followed were a blur of black dresses, hushed condolences, and the suffocating scent of lilies. In the throes of a grief so profound it felt like a physical amputation, I began the task of sorting through the architecture of a shared life, his closets, his desk, his papers. It was in his private study, a room that had always been his sanctuary, that I found the first crack in our foundation. Tucked away in the back of his safe, behind stock certificates and our marriage license, was a worn leather briefcase I had never seen before. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled amongst unfamiliar financial documents, was a photograph of a smiling woman and a girl, maybe 10 years old, with Robert's eyes. My Robert, his arm wrapped around them, the three of them beaming on a beach I didn't recognize. My breath hitched. Beneath the photo lay the truth, cold and irrefutable in a sheaf of papers. A birth certificate for one Chloe Dubois, born 30 years ago, listing Robert Stratford as the father. Bank statements from an offshore account showing decades of systematic multi-million-dollar transfers from his company, a deed to a house in a neighboring state. It was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a second, secret life, meticulously maintained for over 3 decades. The grief that had hollowed me out didn't just vanish, it transmuted, crystallizing into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the birth of a cold, clear fury. The man I had mourned was a ghost, a carefully constructed fiction. The real Robert had been a stranger, and my life, my perfect, curated life, was the most elaborate lie of all. The discovery was a slow, agonizing detonation. I spent that first night in his study, the papers spread across his mahogany desk like evidence at a crime scene. Every memory of our 45 years together began to replay in my mind, but now tainted, recontextualized by the grotesque truth. All those late nights he'd spent closing a deal, the frequent solo business trips to a city where our company had no office, the vague explanations for large, uncategorized expenses he'd waved off as investment opportunities. Each lie had been a brick in the foundation of another woman's home, another child's life. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just a betrayal of the heart, it was a grand larceny of our life, our children's legacy. He had siphoned millions of dollars from Stratford Industries, the company his own father had built, the company my own family's money had helped to save in its early years. He had risked everything, our security, the jobs of his employees, the future of our children, to fund his elaborate deceit. The woman in the photograph, I learned from a property tax receipt, was named Marion Dubois. The house was in her name. The offshore account was an intricate web designed to wash the funds, making them appear as legitimate payments to a shell consulting firm. Robert, the meticulous CEO, had applied his business acumen to his infidelity, managing his 2 lives with the same ruthless efficiency that had made him a legend in his industry. The grief still lingered, a phantom limb aching for a life that had never truly existed, but the fury was a clarifying fire, burning away the fog of sorrow. I was not a victim. I was not a grieving widow to be pitied. I was the majority shareholder of Stratford Industries. I was the sole heir to his entire legitimate estate. He had left me in the rubble of his lies, but in his arrogance he had left me with all the power. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would not expose his tawdry affair to the tabloids. That would be too simple, too clean. He had spent a lifetime building a legacy, a pristine public image of a brilliant, unimpeachable captain of industry. I would not merely destroy it, I would mantle it piece by piece, and rebuild it into a monument of his own deception. His punishment would be his legacy. The next morning, I dressed not in the soft gray of morning, but in a sharply tailored navy blue suit. I walked into the headquarters of Stratford Industries, my heels clicking with purpose on the marble floor. The expressions of the executive staff were a mixture of pity and apprehension. They saw a fragile widow, adrift and lost. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I convened an emergency meeting of the board of directors in the main conference room, the one dominated by a massive, flattering portrait of Robert. I took my place at the head of the table, his vacant chair a stark reminder of the power vacuum he had left behind. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. "As I am sure you are all aware, Robert's passing has left this company in a state of uncertainty. As his sole heir and now the majority shareholder, I intend to eliminate that uncertainty immediately." I let my gaze sweep across their faces, lingering on each one. These were men who had known Robert for decades, who had benefited from his leadership, and who were likely complicit, even if unknowingly, in his financial machinations. Effective immediately, I am assuming the role of interim chairwoman of the board. My first act is to authorize a full, independent forensic audit of the company's finances going back 20 years. A ripple of unease went through the room. The CFO, a man named Gerald, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Brenda, with all due respect, is that really necessary? Robert's books were always impeccable." "Impeccable men are the ones who leave the most complex messes, Gerald," I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. "We owe it to the shareholders and to Robert's memory to ensure a smooth, transparent transition. This audit is non-negotiable. We will present it as a standard part of the succession process, a way to secure the legacy Robert built." By framing it as a tribute to him, I cornered them. To argue against it would be to cast suspicion on their fallen leader. They reluctantly, unanimously, approved the motion. They thought I was a grieving woman trying to protect her husband's company. They had no idea I was a forensic expert, and his legacy was the very thing I intended to burn to the ground. This audit wasn't for me. I already had all the proof I needed. The audit was for them, for the world. It would be the official, undeniable record of his crimes, untainted by the accusations of a scorned wife. While the auditors I hired began their meticulous work, exhuming the company's financial history like archaeologists of deceit, I initiated the second phase of my plan. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and thorough man named Mr. Davies, with a single objective: to learn everything there was to know about Chloe Dubois. I needed to understand the woman who was the living embodiment of Robert's betrayal. I braced myself for the worst: a spoiled, vapid creature living lavishly off my family's money, a willing accomplice to her mother's arrangement. The report Davies delivered a week later was not what I expected. It was far more complicated and far more useful. Chloe Dubois was 30 years old. She was not living a life of idle luxury. She was the vice president of strategic development at a major competing tech firm, a rising star known for her sharp intellect and relentless work ethic. She had an MBA from Stanford. She had earned her position through sheer, unadulterated merit. According to Davies' sources, she believed her father was a freelance investment consultant who had died when she was a teenager. Robert had evidently constructed a completely separate identity for his second life. Chloe and her mother, Marion, lived comfortably but not extravagantly. The house was handsome, the car was a reliable import, but there were no yachts, no couture wardrobes. Robert had provided for them, but he had not made them conspicuously wealthy. He had kept them as a quiet, manageable secret. The most critical piece of information in the report was a single sentence: "Subject appears to have no knowledge whatsoever of her father's true identity or the existence of the Stratford family." She was innocent, a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Any other woman might have felt a pang of pity, a hesitation. For me, her innocence was not a complication. It was the masterstroke. A vengeful exposé would hurt this woman, tarnish her reputation through no fault of her own. But what if, instead of being the collateral damage of Robert's downfall, she became the instrument of it? The plan began to form in my mind, intricate and terrible in its perfect symmetry. Robert had stolen from his company to support his secret daughter. I would use his secret daughter to take back his company. She would not be a victim. She would be his replacement. The idea was so, audacious, so exquisitely cruel that it took my breath away. I scheduled a meeting with Arthur Vance, our family's longtime lawyer and the only man on the board I remotely trusted. We met in my home library, the scent of old leather and would a stark contrast to the revolutionary nature of the plan I was about to propose. I laid it all out for him, the affair, the financial fraud, and the existence of Chloe. He listened, his face growing paler with each revelation. "My God, Brenda," he whispered when I finished, "I am so sorry." "I don't need your sorrow, Arthur," I said, my voice firm. "I need your counsel. The CEO position is vacant. The board is preparing to launch a search." "Yes," he said cautiously. "We'll need to hire a top-tier recruitment firm, form a search committee." "We will," I agreed. "And I want you to oversee it. I want the most rigorous, impartial, and exhaustive search imaginable. I want a list of the best and brightest candidates in the industry, and I want them all to be vetted to within an inch of their lives." He nodded, relieved. "A sensible path forward. It shows stability." "There's more," I said. "I have a candidate I want added to that list. Her name is Chloe Dubois." Arthur stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "Brenda, you can't be serious. The legal exposure, the ethical nightmare. She will be approached anonymously, Arthur." I cut in, my voice sharp. "The headhunter will not reveal the company's name until very late in the process. She will be evaluated on her merits and her merits alone. She is, by all accounts, exceptionally qualified. If she is not the best candidate, she will not get the job. But if she is," I let the sentence hang in the air, "her name will be on that list. She will be given the same chance as everyone else. My shares give me the power to insist on it." Arthur looked at me, a dawning horror and a flicker of awe in his eyes. He saw the sheer, cold brilliance of the strategy. It was a checkmate conceived 10 moves in advance. By insisting on an impartial process, I was creating an unimpeachable defense. If Chloe won, it would be because she deserved it. Her appointment would not be an act of nepotism or revenge, but a sound business decision. It was a plan that used the very rules of the corporate world Robert had mastered to dismantle his memory. Arthur, a man who had dedicated his life to the law, finally gave a slow, reluctant nod. "I will oversee it personally," he said. "The process will be ironclad." From the other side of the country, Chloe Dubois was having a perfectly ordinary Wednesday when the call came. It was from a woman named Alina Vance, no relation to my Arthur. A coincidence that felt like a nod from fate, a legendary executive headhunter from one of the world's most prestigious recruitment firms. Alina was known for placing CEOs at Fortune 500 companies, and her voice was a smooth, intoxicating blend of flattery and discretion. She spoke of a unique opportunity, a legacy company at a critical inflection point, a chance to lead, to innovate, to make a mark. She could not, she said, reveal the name of the company just yet. It was a position of the utmost sensitivity. Chloe was, by nature, ambitious and driven. She had spent her entire career outworking and outthinking her peers. Her father, the man she knew as a quiet investment consultant, had instilled in her a ferocious work ethic before his early death. The mystery and the prestige of the offer were irresistible. She agreed to an initial exploratory conversation, her mind racing with possibilities. She had no idea that her entire life had been a lie, and that this phone call was the beginning of the truth, a truth that would be delivered like a judgment. The recruitment process was, as I had insisted, brutally rigorous. It began with weeks of remote interviews, psychometric testing, and the submission of a detailed strategic analysis of a hypothetical company in a similar market. Chloe sailed through every stage. Her insights were sharp, her vision was bold, and her understanding of market dynamics was, according to the headhunter's confidential reports to the board, simply breathtaking. Finally, the process moved to the finalist stage. Chloe and 2 other candidates, both seasoned male executives with decades of experience, were flown in to meet with the board of Stratford Industries. I sat in on those meetings, a silent observer in my role as chairwoman. Seeing her in person for the first time was a jarring experience. She had Robert's eyes, the same intense, intelligent gaze that could command a room. She had his confident posture, his articulate manner of speaking. But there was a warmth to her, an earnestness that he had lacked or had at least lost long ago. She presented her strategic vision for the company with a passion and clarity that captivated the room. The other board members, who knew nothing of her true identity, were visibly impressed. They saw a Brillia. NT executive, a natural leader. I saw the perfect, poetic instrument of my revenge. Watching Chloe command the boardroom, I was forced to confront the tumultuous conflict within myself. A part of me, the part that was a mother, a wife, a woman, felt a profound and unsettling pity for her. She was a ghost at her own feast, brilliantly auditioning for a role whose true nature was hidden from her. She was on the verge of inheriting a kingdom, but she was also about to be handed a crown of thorns. Was what I was doing truly just? Was it fair to detonate the foundations of this innocent woman's life to settle a score with a dead man? The question haunted me during the long days of the hiring process. I watched her, this living proof of Robert's duplicity, and I saw a reflection of the best parts of him, the parts I had first fallen in love with. The ambition, the sharp mind, the charisma. It was a cruel trick of genetics. At night, I would sit in the profound silence of my home, the house we had built together, and I would argue with his ghost. "Look what you forced me to do," I'd whisper into the darkness. "You have turned me into a monster, a user of people just like you." But then the cold fury would return, a righteous, cleansing fire. Robert had made his choices. He had chosen to lie, to steal, to risk the well-being of his family and his company for a secret life. Chloe, for all her innocence, was a product of that life, a beneficiary of his theft, however unknowing. My plan was not just about punishment. It was about a strange and twisted form of restitution. The money he had stolen to raise her would be repaid by her talent, her work, her leadership. The company he had plundered would be restored by the very daughter he had hidden from it. It was a justice so complete, so symmetrical, that it felt like destiny. The internal battle raged, but my resolve never wavered. I was not just avenging a broken heart, I was rebalancing the scales, righting a cosmic wrong in the only way I knew how. I was taking the rubble of Robert's lies and building something new, and Chloe Dubois would be the cornerstone. The day the search committee convened for their final deliberation, I was a bundle of nerves wrapped in an icy calm. Arthur Vance chaired the meeting, his expression studiously neutral. The board members discussed the 3 finalists at length. They praised the experience of the 2 men, their steady hands and long track records. But when they spoke of Chloe, the tone of the conversation shifted. They spoke of her innovative vision, her modern approach to the market, her palpable energy. "She's a risk," said Gerald, the CFO, "but she might be the high-reward risk we need to take to move past the stagnation of the last few years." It was a backhanded admission of Robert's recent complacency that I savored. After 2 hours of debate, Arthur called for a vote. It was unanimous. The independent, impartial, and rigorously vetted recommendation of the Board of Directors of Stratford Industries was to offer the position of Chief Executive Officer to Ms. Chloe Dubois. The process had worked exactly as I had designed it. Her victory was based entirely on her own merit. My hands were clean. I had merely opened a door. She had been the one to walk through it, brilliantly and decisively. Arthur Vance called her personally to extend the offer. I listened on speakerphone from his office, a silent witness to the pivotal moment. I heard the sharp intake of her breath, the moment of stunned silence, followed by the professionalism that kicked in as she asked about compensation and starting dates. There was an unmistakable thrill in her voice, the sound of a woman who had just shattered a glass ceiling she didn't even know was there. She accepted. Her official start date and the public announcement would be in 2 weeks at a specially convened shareholder meeting. Everything was in place. The forensic audit report had been delivered to my office that morning. A thick, damning volume detailing years of fake invoices, inflated expense reports, and transfers to the shell corporation that funded her life. The stage was set. All the actors were in position. Now, all that was left was the final act. The morning of the shareholder meeting, I selected my attire with the care of a general preparing for a decisive battle. I chose a dress of deep crimson, the color of power and blood. In the weeks leading up to this day, I had briefed my own children, Mark and Jessica. I told them only that I had discovered some financial irregularities in their father's records and that the announcement of the new CEO would be part of a larger plan to secure the company's future. They were sad, confused, protective of their father's memory. They saw my cold efficiency as a strange manifestation of grief. They had no idea of the abyss that was about to open up beneath them. I arrived at the auditorium to a room buzzing with anticipation. The company. Its major investors, its senior employees, and the financial press were all in attendance. I saw my son Mark and my daughter Jessica in the front row, their faces etched with a mixture of pride and sorrow, ready to honor their father's legacy. In the seat of honor next to them was Chloe Dubois, looking poised and confident, the picture of a modern leader. She had met my children briefly before the meeting began, a polite, professional exchange between strangers who had no idea they shared a father. I took my place at the podium on the stage. A large portrait of Robert was projected on the screen behind me, his familiar, handsome face smiling down on the proceedings. I felt a flicker of the old love, a ghost of a pang, but I extinguished it. That man was an illusion. Today, I was here to deal with reality. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent room. "We are here today to mark the end of one chapter for Stratford Industries and the beginning of another. We are here to honor the memory of my late husband, Robert Stratford, and to welcome the leader who will guide us into the future." I paused, letting my gaze fall on my children, then on Chloe. The board has concluded an exhaustive, international search for a new CEO. The process was rigorous, impartial, and focused on one thing: finding the absolute best talent to lead this company. That search led us to one undeniable candidate. I smiled faintly. "It is my great pleasure to introduce you to the new Chief Executive Officer of Stratford Industries, Ms. Chloe Dubois." A wave of polite, enthusiastic applause filled the room as Chloe stood and gave a gracious nod. She was radiant, the embodiment of a bright new future. Mark and Jessica clapped proudly, happy that their mother had found such a capable successor. I let the applause continue for a moment before raising my hand for silence. My expression shifted, the practiced warmth draining away, replaced by something cold and hard. "I said we were here to honor Robert's memory," I continued, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. "And to do that, we must be honest about his full legacy. As part of the transition, I commissioned a complete forensic audit of the company's finances." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. On the screen behind me, Robert's smiling portrait was replaced by the first page of the auditor's report. I clicked a remote in my hand, and slides began to appear. Flow charts of offshore accounts, copies of fraudulent invoices, a summary of over $7 million in company funds diverted over 3 decades. The audit revealed a long-term, systematic fraud perpetrated by my late husband, a secret he kept for over 30 years. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. My children stared, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. "This financial betrayal," I went on, my voice cutting through the rising chaos, "was committed for one purpose: to fund a second, secret life, a life that included a daughter." The room fell into a stunned, tomb-like silence. Every eye was now on me, then darting to my shocked children, then to the damning evidence on the screen. And then I delivered the final, killing blow. "The board and I believe in restitution. We believe that what was taken from this company should be repaid. It seems only fitting, a matter of poetic justice, that the person to lead us forward to rebuild what was broken and to repay that debt through her own brilliance and hard work should be the unknowing beneficiary of that 30-year deceit." I turned and looked directly at Chloe, whose face had gone deathly pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic comprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the silent, shell-shocked room, "please join me in welcoming our new CEO, Chloe Dubois, Robert Stratford's daughter." The ensuing pandemonium was precisely what I had anticipated. The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked shouts, frantic whispers, and the clicking of reporters' cameras. My children, Mark and Jessica, were frozen in their seats, their faces etched with a grief far deeper than the one they had felt for their father's death. This was the death of their entire history, the immolation of their childhood memories. Chloe stood motionless beside her chair, a statue carved from ice, her eyes locked on mine with an expression of profound, soul-shattering betrayal. In that moment, I felt the full, terrible weight of what I had done. I had not just exposed a liar. I had detonated the lives of 3 innocent people in the process. Weeks have passed since that day. The story became a business legend overnight, a brutal tale of corporate intrigue and family destruction. As I had predicted, the narrative I had so carefully crafted took hold. The board, under my steady guidance, had discovered the former CEO's fraud and, in a bold and brilliant move, had appointed the most qualified person in the industry to right the ship, a person who just happened to be his secret daughter. The element of justice was too poetic for the press to resist. My children have not spoken to me since. The truth about their father was a wound too deep, and my cold-blooded method of revealing it was a betrayal they could not forgive. I had destroyed their hero and in the process had perhaps destroyed their love for me. Chloe, against all odds and the advice of every lawyer she consulted, accepted the position. She and I have met only once since the announcement, in the sterile quiet of the CEO's office, her office now. There were no tears, no recriminations. There was only a quiet, chilling understanding between us. She would run the company, and she would succeed, not out of any loyalty to me or the board, but to prove that she was more than the scandalous secret of her father's creation. She is determined to build a legacy of her own on the ashes of his. I am now alone in my large, quiet house, the curator of a museum of a life that never was. I have my justice. Robert's name is now synonymous with scandal, his legacy forever tarnished. The company is in the hands of the one person who has the drive to redeem it. I won. I achieved everything I set out to do. But as I sit here, surrounded by the ghosts of a happy marriage and the profound silence of my estranged children, I am forced to admit that in the scorched earth campaign for my righteous revenge, victory feels an awful lot like ashes.